All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in today. We'll let some people roll in as we're introducing everybody and getting things rolling. But thank you again for taking the time to join us today. This is brought to you by Transcend, but we're going to talk about AdTech versus privacy. Really intriguing topic, especially nowadays. But want to kind of introduce some of my guests. So first, we have Safaa Darwish. She's a program manager, customer privacy operations at Transcend. And then we also have Gary Kibel. He's the partner at Davis+Gilbert. Thank you both for being here today.
Sure. Great to be here.
Yeah. How's everything going? Why don't we start things off a little bit on the light side? Gary, what's something that you're streaming right now, TV show or movie, something that you're into right now that's kind of binging?
Sure. So, well, maybe I'm a little bit behind the times, but I'm catching up on Suits, which
Oh,
everyone has said as a lawyer, how could it be you've never watched Suits? And so I'm finally doing it. It's interesting to see people actually working in an office and wearing
mhm.
ties. It's like going back to the future.
Yes, I actually was part of that whole trend when Suits got added to Netflix. I jumped on it just out of curiosity, and I watched the whole thing in like less than a month or two, or I don't know how long it took, but it kept my attention. It's kind of there's some corniness to it, but it's also just it's one of those. It's a good show. It's got good actors, good writing. Um, easy binge show.
Very enjoyable. Though, as a lawyer, you're looking at it and you're going, oh, ethical violations left and right. Unbelievable.
Oh, I can imagine from your seat, definitely.
Yep.
Safa, what about you? Anything new?
I think ethical violations is a great segue. So we're rewatching Better Call Saul series. There's
There you
definitely
go.
some questionable ethical implications there.
Exactly. I don't know what it is about lawyers and TV. They show us as being quite unethical.
Yeah, that's because they can stretch it. I mean, it's just like those medical shows. Most of them are not very realistic.
Yep.
Let's be honest. But, anyways, let's go ahead and dive into things. If at a high level, Gary, if you want to kind of give yourself a little bit of a background on where you came from, high level, just to give the viewers where you're coming from.
Sure. So I'm a partner at a law firm in New York, Davis+Gilbert, and I've been at this firm for about 23 years. And the firm has a very heavy emphasis in the marketing and advertising industry. It's sort of a full service firm with your typical corporate litigation, labor, and employment. But I'm a partner in a more transactional group, and I co-lead our privacy and digital media practice. So I spend most of my days dealing with ad tech companies, media companies, brands themselves, media agencies, on all sorts of things in the digital ecosystem. And privacy used to be a small slice of the pie, and now it's a massive chunk of the pie.
Oh yeah. And Safal, if you want to give the viewers just a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so I have a data background, which is primarily I specialize in graphical information systems when I was in college, and I knew immediately when I graduated, though, I wanted to be somewhere within like the legal landscape, and I was really interested in privacy. Wasn't entirely sure how to go about getting into it, so I took my remote sensing and satellites knowledge and different mapping technologies knowledge, and I went into a public office law firms and basically pulled data out of databases on individuals who are incarcerated at these massive public offices, and amongst other data. And then from there, I think that I was just very fascinated with public sector and NGO kind of folks working within different landscapes of folks who are probably underserved, and the amount of data that we collect on underserved populations too around the world globally. So you would have, we'd be looking. I remember a project I worked on within the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation scholarship that I had when I had just graduated, that looking at how do we collect data on individuals who are malnourished? Do you have to go down to the zip code, or is it okay to go down to like the block level on this data, kind of a thing? So very kind of nitty gritty, like questions about ethics. Is it okay to, can you collect data on children? Really, if you're an NGO and you want to do something that you would think is ethical, but really you're collecting data on individuals who may or may not have given full informed consent. So kind of fast forward throughout there, got to get into the startup world, really loved data privacy from there, and really quickly became fascinated by AdTech and MarTech. So here we are today at Transcend.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, let's just go into what we're going to go over today. So we're going to obviously get you guys a little bit of an introduction into the topic. We're going to go over some ethical and legal considerations, navigating those regulations, building some customer trust, adapting to a cookieless future, and some of the key takeaways, maybe some predictions for the future. But we'll go ahead and dive right in. So rapid changes in the ad tech landscape. This first question is going to go to Gary. So Gary, what are some of the most significant changes that you've seen over the years that you've observed in the ad tech space?
Sure. And, I'm quite of an old timer since I've been doing this for a while. I mean, I remember back in 2001 when I was helping, provide comments on the initial or version 2 of the IAB terms and conditions for buying digital media. And just the conversations, 20 plus years ago, nobody was asking about the data. Nobody was asking about the information, and nobody was concerned about who owned the data. Certainly nobody was concerned about consumer choices and consumer control. So it was such a minor, insignificant part of the digital media landscape. And then it started to grow in the early 2000s when DoubleClick was thinking of taking over Abacus, and the federal government was concerned about the combination of those data sets and
Right.
what it might mean. And from there into the 2007, 2008, when the Federal Trade Commission started to get concerned about behavioral advertising. And then you had the birth of the DAA, the Digital Advertising Alliance. So it just kept on growing and growing. And now I think the industry is sort of on steroids, because up until the CCPA 4 years ago, we just did not have any comprehensive consumer privacy laws. We had on the federal level the FTC Act, and they would regulate deceptive and unfair practices, which they would use to apply to privacy. You had sectoral laws for children or healthcare or financial services. But the world really changed with CCPA, and before that with GDPR. And now we're in a place where we have so many different laws that are all conflicting, and there's not one strictest standard, and it's making compliance for those in the industry unbelievably challenging.
Yeah, very good points. Safaa, kind of adding on to that, working with customers and on that side of things, in the privacy realm, where do you see like a balance between privacy and business objectives maybe evolving in the near future?
I mean, I think this is that's the $1 million-billion question, right? So I actually came from GoPuff or Go Brands prior to coming over to Transcend. So I got to, work in a very fast-paced, instant needs delivery startup. It was great. I loved working at GoPuff. This was the question every single day, right? Like, a business is meant to grow. It's meant to be accelerated forward. Like, in order to make a business grow and move fast, you have to be ready at the drop of a hat. And where does privacy really fit into that? I think that a lot of times in, out there within a lot of companies, folks who are trying to accelerate a business and really are business driven, might come into conflict a lot of times with data privacy. Folks who might be black letter of the law, this is exactly what we have to do, and then kind of get blinded by focusing on the privacy aspect instead of how do we really balance and be enabling to the company to move fast and move forward. So, I mean, data compliance, as far as I can see, I think that we're enablers. I saw myself at my prior org at Go Brands as, enabler of ad tech too. This is if you put the right safeguards in place and you give people a choice, because really what it boils down to is choice. I think that informed consent is a whole other discussion and whatnot. And I think that as privacy becomes more and more part of the fabric of US culture, specifically, thinking about US side, I think that EU and UK are a little bit further along and having privacy as being part of the cultural fabric. I think that's really the consent piece of it is really important while you're moving forward fast in a business. But otherwise, I really do see privacy as an enabler. Like you set up the safeguards, you work with product, you work with engineering, you work with legal, and you make sure that as you're moving along, you're setting up these safeguards as you push the business forward, and get yourself a solid tool in order to do that. That's maybe I'm a little bit biased for Transcend, but really, if you're trying to grow a business and you're trying to balance things out, you need something that's super flexible, that you need to be flexible too as you're implementing these solutions, and you're keeping up with regulations at the same time. That realize business can change and decisions can change overnight. So get yourself a flexible tool and make sure that you're very cross-functional and working with your AdTech, MarTech teams.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, flexibility, number one, for sure nowadays compared to like a legacy platform, just something you're able to adapt and grow with as this evolving landscape continues to change and evolve. Gary, anything to add on there before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, there's, certainly a heightened focus on consumer control and, of course, legal compliance. Um, you know, I also, just my personal view as I think about the societal impact of a lot of these new privacy regulations on the ad tech ecosystem. Because if you're, a mid-sized company, you survive based on monetizing your data. If
Right.
you're a media publisher, news organization, or even, some mommy blogger or startup, you need to survive based on monetizing the data. And my concern sometimes is regulators are going too far with this, making it harder for businesses to monetize the data. And then what's the result? The big guys will survive, the small ones will not. The large ones may move to subscription models, which you're starting to see a little bit of that in Europe. And then what that does societally is that it makes the internet just for rich people who can afford subscriptions, because those can't otherwise folks can't monetize their data. And I think those at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale need access to those free services. They can't have a subscription to everything. So I get concerned that sometimes that argument's getting lost in the guise of privacy, because regulators think that, oh, all consumers really want is privacy, but they don't realize that consumers also really want and need free services. Everything can't be a subscription service, because that would only benefit a limited few.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. And I wish we had a little more time to dig into what you said about what they're doing. You don't understand why they're doing it this way. But the funny thing is we all know that laws take a very long time to be put in place, but we see a rapid pace with AI and how things are kind of, I mean, I think something was just passed with AI. I didn't get to read into it either today or yesterday. But
Yeah.
anyways, another topic, but yeah, fascinating stuff. So let's move on to the legal frameworks and, like you guys mentioned before, ethical. Talk about some of the ethical dilemmas and things like that. Gary, how do the current legal frameworks address the challenges of data privacy in the context of ad tech?
So the challenge, as I said earlier, is that we have different standards and different requirements all over the place. So, and it's not just EU versus the US. With all the different comprehensive state privacy laws in the US, we now have different standards state to state. And clients often say to me, well, just give me the strictest standard and I'll comply with it. It must be California, right? And I say, no, California is not the strictest standard with everything. There are many states that have opt-out requirements, others that have opt-in requirements. Definitions vary from state to state. Definitions of what's considered sensitive personal information can vary. And then you get unique laws that pop up, like the Washington My Health, My Data Act, which
Yep.
really impacts the way that a certain type of data is being processed. So it really becomes, I think, challenging for businesses in order to keep up on this. And one of the hard things is when you're building a business that obviously is going to appeal to clients all over the country, all over the world, trying to come up with your compliance model so that it works in every jurisdiction where you want to target. So I think companies need to sit back and make some, hard decisions about which standards they want to comply with, which consumers they want to be able to interact with, and building those compliance models are going to take time.
Is there any difference that a company should approach this? We're talking about small business to, enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, the first step for any business, whether you're large or small, is what laws apply to me. Now, if
Right.
you're a smaller business, there may be fewer that apply to you because in the US, a lot of the state comprehensive privacy laws have threshold tests. So you may be under the threshold for those different laws. But it's looking to see whether or not they apply to you. Safaa was talking about NGOs, and I'm thinking about not-for-profits. And
Mhm.
a number of the state comprehensive privacy laws don't apply to not-for-profits, but some do. For example, Colorado's comprehensive privacy law applies to non-for-profits. California, the CCPA, does not. So
Mm.
you need to start with that first step and say, what applies to me? Then you'll go on to step number 2 about the type of data you're processing, what the specific laws require with respect to that data, and then how do you implement that with your consumers.
Makes sense. Safaa, in your opinion, what steps can an organization take to maybe ensure that they're ethically and legally compliant in their data practices?
Well, you can come to us as customers and we'll definitely help you out with letting you know what's out, what we're seeing on the industry, but we'll never advise you legally. We'll always tell you to go back to your legal team for anything. I think that we need to kind of like in privacy, talking about ethics versus talking about legal requirements, legislation, regulations, those are kind of two different things. When we go out and customers come to us, maybe like it might be like an ad tech company, or it could be a fintech company too, where they're looking for, okay, well, we have this data, like we need to monetize, like what Gary was saying, like we need to monetize this. Like this is like a huge part of what we're bringing in terms of revenue. And if we're going to offer a free service, back to what Gary was saying, there's got to be some kind of sale there. Like there's no company that's going to be operating completely free. Just here's this great software. We're just going to give it to you all.
What do you mean, like Facebook? Facebook, you just sign up for free.
You can sign up for free, and then they can feed it into their AI model. And
Of course.
yes, and I don't think AI is cool. AI is great. Gemini is really powerful. Like OpenAI is
Mhm.
really powerful. I think that when we're talking about like these balances between ethics and legality, but like the compliance story, because compliance is a story. Everyone's trying to figure this out. Regulators might be coming in, and there's XYZ checkboxes that you need to be checking off. There's no company in the entire world, whether you're huge or you're small, that is going to be completely 100% to the T on any one piece of compliance. Like that's just not, we're going to try our best here. And again, I think it goes back to that flexibility piece where, customer comes to you. I'm just going to give you an example. Customer comes to you and says, like, we just lost like 67% in terms of opt-outs from a prior tool. And this is huge for our business. Like we can't have folks coming to our site and then losing 67% due to opt-outs. And then we kind of sit down and look at that and we say, okay, well, let's bring on your legal team and let's kind of discuss like how you want to go along here. And then really sit down and kind of take a look at, forget the cookies, folks. Let's look at your pixels. Let's look at your web beacons. Let's look at, any number of other pieces here that track data in order for a sale or a share. It really does come down to that balance though, and understanding that there's no such thing as perfect, but there is such a thing as trying to do your best. And really, tooling nowadays, like Excel spreadsheets are out. Get yourself a solid tool that can help you know where your data is, where it's going. That's really like the where, what, when, why, how is super important in all of this. Anything to do with ad tech, know where it's going, know where it's coming from, and getting those kind of those baselines of just knowing where things are. I think from there you can really sit down and decide, how do we want to be able to handle this in order to balance out consumer human rights, or and also like what the needs of the company is too, to be able to move forward. And again, I'm going to go back to this cultural shift too within the privacy landscape. I think that folks who are just now in the US kind of coming up and understanding really how their data is being shared, and this is kind of like a new thing in the stateside for us. How do we change that within the culture for them to, for folks in general, like your your neighbor, to be able to understand, if you want to be advertised the stuff that you actually like, there's going to be some kind of a sale or a share of your data. Federated learning, or on device learning or not, there has to be something there that is being shared or sold.
Yeah, agreed. Anything else before we move on to the next slide?
Well, I think, as Fa was saying about, like, trying to do your best, and it's hard to be in 100% compliance with all the different legal requirements. If you're going to put together, say you have a global company and a privacy policy that's going to apply to every single law that applies to your business, your privacy policy is going to be 10, 15,000 words. And so, and then how does that help for consumer privacy if consumers are just massively confused? So there is a balance of trying to balance the legal compliance with the objective of really being helpful to consumers, and to give them the choices, give them the disclosures they need. And that's hard as we get more and more legal frameworks we have to comply with.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I think initially it seems like anything when it comes to legal terms, or just, let's take the iPhone or anything Apple, when you set up a new Apple device, how many people actually read any of the beginning messages when you're setting all of that privacy stuff up? It's probably not many, unless you're Gary. I'm sure Gary reads that.
Oh, yes, I dig into them, and sometimes we'll raise questions about them. Yes, because that's what lawyers do.
Now, do you think it's because obviously companies, I wouldn't want to say take advantage of consumers, but obviously they want to make it to where it is confusing. But I think that can lose that trust, right? And it's nice to see that the culture is kind of changing. You're seeing companies make it more, just more simplistic for consumers to check a box and consent if they want to, or reject all, if we're talking about cookies or whatever. But hopefully that shift will get better.
I mean, there's a balance. I mean, because look, the honest truth is that businesses want to offer consumers rights, but they don't want to lose all their consumers and have them all opt out of everything.
Right.
And, before there were laws, it was about trying to find that right balance to appear privacy friendly, but not lose all your consumers, because then you'll crush business models. We're talking now about, GPC signals and do not track, and being able to opt out of all data brokers at once. I mean, let's think about that in terms of traditional media. If there was a big red button on the front of your TV which said, press this button and you'll never see another television commercial again, think how many people would press that button. And then what would happen? The media industry would crumble. It would be destroyed. Mm-hmm. So we want to give consumers rights, but we don't want to destroy a business model that's giving people free services and free content.
Right. There's got to be that fine balance. That makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the compliance side of things, when it comes to the regulatory landscape. I'll start with Safaa this time. With the landscape of regulations constantly evolving, how can companies stay updated and ensure compliance? From your view?
It's overwhelming for a lot of companies. There's a new state law coming on, what it feels like sometimes every day. There's, like what Gary was saying, my health, my data. That's pretty huge, and it's another niche thing. And when folks hear about it, there's kind of like this frenzy. Like, what do we do? How do we change? How do we adjust our business? Do we need to adjust our business? It's really needing to find that, and a lot of times actually customers come to us and they're like, can you notify us whenever we have a new law come online, or whenever there's a new piece of legislation that's going to be going live. And I think like we do a pretty good job of that over at Transcend, that because we do have folks that are watching, like we do keep up as an organization. Like we're engineering driven, and we're very much like privacy nerds over here. Like we focus on this piece. And I think that don't get overwhelmed. Like number one thing, there's a lot of noise out there. I'm not talking about differential privacy noise. There's a lot of noise. And there's a lot of times when there might be something that comes online and that's scary. I always go back and think about, okay, what are some of like the earliest privacy laws and legislation that was like kind of, base to where we are today? Like maybe think about back in the 60s or even the 70s, like data access was huge. I mean, and there was even talk about like, do we really need horse law to be able to regulate privacy at one point? And fast forward, yes, like we have something very specific. We have many laws now specific to privacy. But really, kind of when a new law comes online, let's keep calm and carry on. It's just privacy. We all want some degree of privacy as individuals. Really look back at like, what are the foundational pieces here? Like, is there an access requirement? What's the opt-in, opt-out requirements here? And then is there like a deletion requirement? That might sound super simplistic, and it might sound like it's missing a bunch of things. I think start with those huge pieces, though. You can get really in the weeds on the requirements. Like you can read and reread Colorado's law, and really start questioning everything. But if you really sit down and go back down to the pillars, the fundamentals of privacy, and keep your privacy team keep their radar on for these snippets that are so foundational to privacy, usually what you can do, especially again, if you have a flexible tool and you yourself are flexible, you can take in that information. I have this checklist. Is there anything here that I need to be concerned about for this new piece of legislation? Okay, we probably already have a solution in place. If we don't, let's discuss. Number one thing, don't panic. And number two, look at your checklist there. Look at those foundational pieces, opt-outs, deletions, and accesses. And then from there, you can really build out, I think. And that's just kind of the way I've seen with other customers and the way they've implemented different privacy solutions. Look at your foundational pieces and then move on from there.
Yeah. Now, I had a thought and it just slipped me. So I'm going to come back to it. But Gary, what are some common pitfalls or misconceptions regarding any of the regulatory compliance in the AdTech industry that you see?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues we had going back maybe 10, 15 years ago is debates over what's considered personal information. And everyone thought, well, I have a cookie, that's anonymous. I don't have a name or an email address. Now we have laws that define what is personal information or personal data. And we have new court rulings, and the industry really needs to understand it's all personal. Look at the blog posting last week from the Federal Trade Commission talking about browsing data and sensitive data. And, look at the ruling from the Court of Justice of the European Union a few days ago, last week, about the IAB's TCF, Transparency and Consent Framework, where they said even the signal that's transmitted by the TCF program is personal data. It's all personal. So whether you're processing cookie IDs, IP addresses, even hashed emails, maids, user agents, it's all going to be personal. And so then you have to look into these laws and see, all right, now how am I going to apply these laws to such unique pieces of data? Because if it's a name or email address, that's easy. I'll just make a web page. Someone can put in their name and email address and opt out. But if I'm only processing a cookie ID, or I'm only processing a MAID, a mobile advertising identifier, how do I give consumers these choices when I didn't know who they were to begin with? I just had a series of numbers which identified that individual or their device. So hopefully that misconception is going away. It's all personal data, and the laws apply to all these different types of elements that you're collecting. The only way to get out of these laws is to truly de-identify it to the point that it can no longer ever be linked back to an individual or device. And that de-identification really needs to be irrevocable, can't be reverse engineered. You can't match the data back to other things to re-identify it. And really you get to the point where the data is really worthless. So when you hear someone say it's anonymous or it's not PII, stop them for a minute. It's probably still personal information or personal data under the applicable laws.
Yeah.
Do you see any? Oh, go ahead, Safaa.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree. Like, I don't know how many times I've been in a product or an AdTech MarTech meeting, and somebody from the technical side has brought up, well, I mean, this is encrypted, or this is salted and peppered. This is, completely, this is unidentifiable data. Like, well, encryption is completely different than it's not actually even possible. It might take you months or a year to be able to untangle the data and be able to put everything back together in order to identify a natural person, but you still could. And I think that's also kind of like that's the difference between maybe security versus privacy. Security, very difficult to be able to identify a natural person, but maybe not completely impossible. But the data is safe. Like, there's a safety piece of it versus like the privacy piece of it is, well, you can figure out that this is a natural person. And I think, like what Gary was saying too, like the regulations and the laws coming into effect or already in effect really look at everything as personal data. And even if it is encrypted to the point that it is very difficult to trace it back to a natural person, you can still do that. And that really makes everything a lot more complicated. And I think that's where, again, you really have to take a step back whenever you have a new piece of regulation come online, and make sure you're still the enabler as the privacy team. Be the enabler within your org. Like, you never want to stop the business from growing. Like, businesses grow. And I think that as we move forward into the future, regulations are really going to have to adjust to that, just for competition's sake. That this growth needs to happen. But at the same time, really, we're kind of stuck in this kind of funny back and forth between, okay, personal data versus security, kind of, and these kind of confusion sometimes between what those two pieces are, and that seem like so much intertwined.
Yeah, funny enough, that does get confused more than it should. You can have security without privacy, but you can't have privacy without security. And to your point, Safaa, and this is for both of you, I mean, what do you guys see? What do you foresee when it comes to the regulatory landscape and shaping the ad tech space? How do you see that going?
Well, I mean, now we have new laws, and new laws are being enacted at a rapid pace, but we haven't seen a ton of enforcement yet.
Right.
And I think the enforcement side is going to start to pick up a lot. And through enforcement, we learn a lot of things because we get the sense from the regulators about what things they're concerned about, what they think is an acceptable practice, what they think is not an acceptable practice. Because, of course, every single example is not set out in the laws and the regulations. So while you never want to be the target of an enforcement action, I think if you're not the target of enforcement action, having others be the target is very helpful because then you can learn from that. But I really think 2024 is going to be the year of enforcement. The FTC has certainly stepped up their game with enforcement against data brokers. We've now had 2 public enforcement actions in California. I think we're going to see Colorado and Connecticut start to join the mix. And it can be bad if you're the target of the enforcement action, but it'll be helpful for the rest of the industry to see what the regulators are thinking and what they're concerned about.
Yeah, it's 2024 is really going to be a fascinating year, and just going to get more interesting too. I mean, like, the kind of the big privacy cases that we've seen in the past have been like almost very blatant. Like, I'm thinking about Sephora. Like, when that when that happened, just I think that was back 2022 now. Like, they had received a warning, and they're were kind of just very obviously, like, there was some consent issues there with the way that it was on their website. Very obvious, and they had received a warning as well. Whereas now we're really, like, CPPA is really kicking it up, and I think also it's becoming more and more part of the culture too. So you really have like this cultural shift, and seeing folks, who are your natural, just everyday people, kind of bringing up privacy concerns to businesses that are large and that meet the threshold requirements for having a data privacy program. And then also like these enforcement actions from regulators. So it's an interesting time between these enforcements coming down from regulators, and also like this cultural shift that we're seeing more and more folks become aware of their privacy rights.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next one. So transparency and user consent. We touched on transparency a little earlier, but Gary, what strategies have you seen effectively build trust with consumers in terms of data privacy and preference management?
Sure. Well, certainly going to the latter part of your question there, in terms of preference management, you need to comply with what your legal obligations are. And then in order to do so, you need to either use a third-party tool to do it, or the more challenging step to build it on your own. But you need to build in the options that apply to your business under the applicable laws. And then in terms of transparency, it's always good to be clear with the consumer about what your business model is. Regulators long ago said you can't just disclose on page 7 of your privacy policy something unique that you're doing with the data that would not be intuitive to the user. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the user, and for them to realize, well, if I'm using this service, how is my data going to be processed? For example, if you're using a weather app, all right, it's plainly obvious they're going to need my location, because how else are they going to tell me what the weather is where I live? But if it's a gaming app and you're collecting location data, well, why is that necessary? So you really need to step outside the policies and step outside the disclosures and think about anything that's not intuitive to the user and get that up front. Because if you don't, then a regulator might look at it and say that you didn't make appropriate disclosures. And so somebody couldn't make an informed decision about opting in or opting out to certain data processing, because they didn't understand what the purpose was for collecting the data in the first place.
That's a good point. I have noticed that a lot more apps are asking for location data when you first open them up, which is very odd. But you would think it's probably because they just want to know where maybe their users are located. But at the same time, like, why? Like you
Well, a
said.
couple of reasons they want the location data. Could be for the reasons that you mentioned, Cameron. Of course, on mobile platforms, especially on iOS, it's opt-in anyway, so you need to give a pop-up to get it. And precise geolocation is defined as sensitive under a certain number of state laws. But it also may be that they're selling the data, because, again, they're trying to monetize a free service. So if I'm able to sell location data for a mobile device, then that's very helpful and valuable data to someone. So going back to your original question, well, what do you do? Well, then you got to make it clear to consumers that we are selling data, and give you the ability to opt out, and really make it clear why you're selling the data. Are you collecting the data for your own use? You're selling it to third-party advertising networks, to some other parties who are going to market goods or services. But I don't begrudge an app or a website from selling data if they need to monetize their free service. They just need to be choice is readily available.
Yeah. Safaa, it looks like you have a little, like you want to add.
Transparency, user consent, like people don't want to be lied to. That's like bottom line. Like, a lot of times, like the cover up is worse than the crime. In this kind of scenario too. And I don't think a lot of companies are necessarily trying to mislead. A lot of times there's accidents that even happen, or there's a new regulation that came online, something that got missed in a product that kind of no one really noticed, but wasn't actually intended to mislead anybody in terms of the transparency piece. I think too, again, like be, completely echoing what Gary said. Folks want to know. You give help them be as informed with their consent as possible. At the same time, too, the companies like who are trying to make a buck and in order to move the company forward, it's challenging for sure. Like, what is informed consent? And this cultural shift, again, I think that we're really seeing with the consumer and these end users is huge. I mean, I would think I was listening. I think it was a Vox piece on, just dating apps, and the individual who went onto a dating app and did a data access request, I believe in the UK, received all their data and just didn't realize that they had precise geolocation and they had every single little piece of information really that had ever gone on within the dating app. And also dating apps also share data with other apps, or they grab data from other apps as well too. That's just the way that you can create a profile for the person in order to do a match, / if you wanted to do any kind of cross contextual advertising. That's the way that companies make money, especially with the dating app. And I think that this cultural shift is definitely on the company to help the consumer understand and be transparent as possible that data is being shared or data is being sold, that you might receive cross-contextual advertising, but at the same time, it's also, I really think that, kind of taking a step back maybe from like the regulation piece, like I'm really hoping in the future too that we're kind of not putting all the blame on these companies, but also like realizing that a company can only give as much informed consent as like they're capable of, and be as transparent as they can. Really, I think it's a cultural shift too that might need to be happening here. So don't lie. That's all.
Yeah.
Give people
I mean,
a good way to opt out. Get a good solid tool. So
that goes without saying in life in general. Like, you want to have those friends that tell you the hard truth. You don't want people to just coat things. So you want companies that tell you the truth. If they're going to be doing something, just tell us. I think that goes a longer way in terms of, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with an E. I don't know. I'm going to move on though. But Safaa, to that point, to add on to it, how can companies strike a balance between personalization and respecting, I guess you might have just kind of dove into that a little bit, but if there's anything else that you wanted to add around user preferences and anything like that.
yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Because if I go on to my instant needs app and they have all the data that would let them know that I probably really want Cheetos, and if I opt out from that, I might be getting advertisements for something completely unrelated that I absolutely do not want, or that I could even be finding offensive in some cases. And like I've definitely seen that, like wherever if I go into an opt out or I go onto an app and I opt out, I can definitely see the companies that have put some blockers in place to not share my data or not give me cross contextual advertising, and I get things that like I don't want necessarily. And I think that's a difficult piece to balance, because it's hard on the consumer, because they go on the app and they can lose interest. You get a higher bounce rate. They might not be as happy. And then, of course, it's harder on the company too. They lost a sale, and they could also be losing out on the sharing or sale of the data of the person coming to the app or the web app. And yeah, I think it's a very difficult balance to strike, but not impossible too. Right now, what you do is, okay, what we work with what we have, what's in place right now too. We give the consumer the chance to opt out, and there's always the chance to opt in. There's always that chance. I think though that it right now in the landscape, it is difficult though too. I think some consumers are informed and they actually do want the cross-contextual advertising. Like they want to be targeted, and go on to the great shopping mall of the internet, which is Instagram, and just have stuff like thrown in front of them. Like, this is exactly what I wanted. I never knew I needed this. Whereas some are just do not want that curation. And again, I think it's not an easy balance to strike right now, but I really think that with this landscape changing and us going away from cookies and going completely cookieless into a cookieless future, I think that we're going to rapidly also see a shifting in the regs, and also the way that the consumer, as privacy laws become more and more ubiquitous, decides to opt in or opt out of sale or share.
Yeah. Gary, do you have anything to add on to any of this?
No, I
from
mean, I think that, and I know we're going to talk shortly about, a cookieless future, which is really, how do we continue a lot of the things that we talked about going forward when there's, a different technical model that we have to deal with.
right. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into it then. So when we're talking about the future, um, what are some of the main challenges, Gary, when it comes to ad tech companies facing, the impending demise of the cookie monster?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different solutions out there for other persistent identifiers to enable targeting to continue. And it's kind of a question about which model is going to survive.
Right.
So I know if you're a media publisher, you're looking at lots of different solutions. If you're an ad tech company, you try to offer a lot of different solutions. And if you're an advertiser, you say, look, I just want to be able to get my message out to the right person at the right time. And if we're not able to find future ways of properly targeting people in a privacy safe manner, well, then there's a ripple effect. So then advertising inventory on the online becomes less valuable because it's not reaching the right people. Advertisers are then just, throwing a dart at a dartboard, trying to find the right customers, and they probably have to spend more money for less valuable eyeballs. So it's important, I think, for everyone in the ecosystem to come up with new ways of identity management and targeting in a privacy safe way so that the free online model can continue. And I've seen lots of companies come up with unique plans and unique IDs. Hopefully, I hope a lot of them take hold and continue, because if they don't and the large portals close everyone else out, then the only ones who are able to target and identify people will be the, Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsofts of the world, because and Amazon's, because they have all the data. And for anybody else, in the second tier or third or fourth tier below that, are not going to be able to target and reach consumers. They're not going to be able to sell their inventory for a valuable amount to support their services. And smaller brands and advertisers are not going to be able to reach consumers other than on those large platforms and portals.
Do you think there are other alternative tracking methods or technologies that you think will become more prominent in the
Yeah, I mean, we
absence of
have
these?
seen, some things like, UID 2.0 and, Google Privacy Sandbox, and then some, fingerprinting, technologies, and more sophisticated probabilistic identifiers. So there's lots of different methods out there. Of course, they only work if you have a critical mass of users using them so that you can
Right.
identify them, because you don't want to be the only person at the party.
That's a good point. Safa, how can companies maybe adapt to their ad tech strategies to maybe maintain effectiveness in a cookieless future when it comes to respecting user privacy?
I mean, I think they already are. Like what I've seen, like there's so many technologies out there. I mean, Gary just rattled off a few. They're there. I mean, it keeps coming. I mean, you talk about things like an actual data sale, like you're selling like a data set, or whether you're utilizing pixels that are fired off. I think that there's folks are interested, and people are smart, and we're in the age of AI. I have no doubt that we're gonna see a replacement for cookies that will be the next go-to. I mean, it's kind of funny, like we're talking about a cookieless future, and a lot of folks on the street still don't quite get what cookies are, but they really want their cart to be there when they navigate away from the page and come back. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that with companies, people are smart, and we'll figure out a way, like we're with the changing times. So
Yeah. This is being in privacy the last, cybersecurity and privacy the last 5, 6 years. Um, I'll tell you what, it never gets stale. It definitely continues to teach you things, and there's always something new every week, every day. It's amazing, to be honest with you. It's very intriguing. Um, and like you said before, Gary, it's nice to see that so the legal action is being it's been steps are taking, like everybody's stepping up, and in terms of actually doing something, which is nice. So it's going to be interesting to see how 2024 and beyond kind of continues to pile on.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes my wife's a lawyer also, but she does real estate law, and I sometimes joke with her. I say, my area of law changes daily. Your area of law hasn't changed in 100 years. Like, maybe there's a new form out there or something like that. But like, I mean, as privacy lawyer, you can't unplug for a 2-week vacation because you're not going to know what's going on in law and in the industry if you do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's crazy though. It really hasn't changed. Is it ever going to change, you think, for her?
It's such minor little changes here and there. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not enough lawyers on the call to give war stories, but nothing like what goes on in our industry.
Yeah. I mean, that has to excite someone like yourself in your position. Or maybe it's more of a headache because there's so many things that are continuously to
No,
change.
I mean, it definitely makes it an interesting area of law to practice. And like I sometimes tell people, being a privacy lawyer, I almost feel like I own a window factory, and like someone's going around at night breaking all the windows, and then someone calls me in the morning and says, "Oh my gosh, I need new windows." And it's just because there's so many new laws coming out, it's making it more challenges for businesses, and they need to reach out and get support.
Yeah. Very good. So last slide here. For obviously the theme has always been the evolving landscape. I mean, for both of you, what do you think? What are some predictions for the future of the tech landscape um, as things continue to evolve? What do you maybe see, or what would you continue to change in this area?
I mean, it's a brave new world, isn't it? It's definitely exactly what Gary was saying. It's changing every single day, is what it feels like. I think that uh, I was just looking at like the Reddit's bid for IPO going public. I think that looking at the way the Reddit model is, their users are the data. They're the ones who contribute to the platform. They're the ones really who work the platform. They're workers who are not necessarily paid by Reddit. And kind of that business model of, okay, well, we really can't make money off of this, where it's not really it's hard to make money off this unless we sell data. And kind of looking at the blackout protests that happened at Reddit when Reddit came out and said, yeah, we're selling data, that this is the way that we're going to be making our money. And the reaction from the communities within Reddit that all like went black and stopped creating content and stopped curating content within Reddit. I think that where we are right now, moving into the future, we're going to see kind of more of a divide like that for at least a little while, where you have folks who are completely like, don't sell my data. I want to continue to kind of be, 20 years ago, where I'm kind of building out the internet. I am part of the founders of like really creating the internet, and creating like Reddit really created a bunch of great data for Google. And we really wouldn't have Google today, I think, if we didn't have such like an active Reddit users. And just kind of realizing that with these cultural shifts, like technology wise, I mean, Cameron, you and I, we work at a great engineering led organization. Like, we love coming up with brand new products that really are flexible and that we can really kind of on a dime turn around and figure out something new. But at the same time, I think that there's the technology piece, and technology is always going to keep evolving. Like, people, again, they're smart, and we're going to keep moving forward into the future. We're going to figure out a replacement for the cookie. We're going to do something completely new in terms of maybe consent even. But really, I think that it's going to be more of an interesting like kind of cultural shift too, seeing like the folks who are completely against a sales share of the data, and folks who actually are on like the more of the sell my data. I need that curated. I need the product. Like, I want the product, and I don't want to have to pay a subscription service and live in a free internet. Free as in you don't have to pay anything, but you are the payment. So it's going to be interesting. I think a cultural shift too as we move into the future, and we see more and more folks like that who are kind of on the other extreme.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that certainly it would be good for businesses if there was more consistency in the legal models. And, that's a wish. I don't know if that'll ever happen. I think it's just getting more complex by the day, but consistency would be fantastic for an industry if you had a few standards instead of endless different standards you have to comply with. And then it's a balance between the different forces out there, between those who are, super, privacy advocates and, those who are saying, that the tech industry can do no wrong. It's got to be a balance because, as we've all been saying, as I was just saying a second ago, people don't want to pay subscriptions for everything. Reddit is free. You don't want to have to pay $5 a month to be able to access it. Well, it's like your mother told you, nothing in life is free. There's a cost for everything. And so, I wish kind of the conversation would be a balance that, advertising and targeted advertising and monetizing data is not an evil. It's part of what makes this fantastic online free ecosystem work. We need to give consumers the right control. I'm very much a proponent of regulating sensitive personal information, but for mere browsing data and preferences and trying to serve the right ad at the right time, I think we need to find a way to allow that without stigmatizing it.
That's good. That's good advice. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for us. So I just want to thank both of you for taking the time today, and also for everybody out there who tuned in. If you have questions or anything like that, you can always send them in the chat and LinkedIn and everything, and we'll get back to you. And but yeah, this has been great, and it'll be interesting to see how things evolve. So thank you, everyone. And Gary, where can anybody go follow you? If is it just LinkedIn?
Sure, they can find me on LinkedIn and my law firm's website, which is dglaw.com. That's DG as in Davis+Gilbert, law.com. We have lots of great articles there and content that we post often to our website.
Great. Safaa, for you, anything you want to promote?
LinkedIn. Follow me up on LinkedIn. That's my
Awesome.
extensive social media.
Well, we'll see you guys next time.